Now Rene has gone out and essentially eaten his own poison pills.
It's not exactly like another Apple's coming along down the road.
I do think it's very counter to everything that ARM has stood for over the years. Welcome to Supply Chain. I'm Tim Culpin from Culpium.
I'm John from Asianometry. Tim, yeah, I'm just looking at your shirt. You got some nice arms today.
Well, thank you. Maybe I should make CPUs.
Oh, wow. That's just exactly in line with what we're talking about today. How about that?
ARM is getting into the CPU business. What do you think?
You know, I kind of thought for the first time, a lot of people ask me to do a video about ARM. And the problem is that it's such a well-covered company. It's almost memed for the fact that it does a weird thing.
It is such a unique company.
It's a unique company, and then it's kind of like everyone talks about how unique it is, and then you're like, well, what else can I bring to this table?
I looked forward to Ben and David of Acquired doing an ARM episode. I want to hear a 4-hour episode from Acquired on ARM. That's I'm throwing down that challenge to them. We're not going to talk for 4 hours about ARM. We're just going to talk about the fact that they're getting to the CPU business, which is just weird because they then become the competitor of every one of their clients.
Right. And I think there was a really good interview by Mr. Ben Thompson.
Yes.
Who talked a little bit about some of this.
Yeah.
And he he was interviewing the CEO.
Rene, yeah.
And then I think, did they talk about it? Well, obviously he has to have talked about it.
Yeah, he talked about so he interviewed Rene and Ben does great interviews. And it was just at the time that they announced it. And I think in a way it was kind of, Ben was the platform to talk in depth about it.
Right.
My takeaway from that interview was something that sounds obvious to those in the know, but is perhaps a little esoteric to everyone else, is that Rene sees software as being the key to an ISA, the instruction set architecture, which is the way you map out how a chip works and how it takes instructions, which is what ARM is about, right? It's a different approach to what we all know as x86. And the more Rene talked about it, the more I thought, well, isn't that all the reason why you wouldn't want to compete with your customers? But Rene's like, no, we're not competing with our customers, we're just coming out with a good product. It sounds counterintuitive. Rene made a very good argument about it. Ben did a good job of kind of pushing him on it. My conclusion at the end of it is I think this could go in a direction that is not necessarily going to be good for ARM, but Rene is smarter than me, so he's made the decision, and I'm just a guy who talks about it. But I do think it's very counter to everything that ARM has stood for over the years.
It's kind of interesting where, like, one of the issues that ARM had for many years was that they kind of sold a lot of their IP, which is like the instruction set. There's different levels. It's very complicated. These are very complicated contracts. But they had these very weird setups. But like they did it very early on to the biggest customers. And their biggest customers are now locked into these very long-term contracts. This is what I've not verified this, but like my understanding is that they have these very long-term contracts which don't pay them a lot. So Apple, for instance, has a type of contract where they don't necessarily use ARM cores. They have an instruction set. They implement their whole everything ground up or something like that. And the result of that is that ARM now has like really big customers. Their name is on it, but they're not earning a lot from it.
Yeah.
So then my thinking is that you make the chip because otherwise you're not gonna. Your biggest customers already have what they're going to do with it, and you're not earning as much from it.
You can't squeeze much more out of it.
Yeah. Those contracts, I guess, are ironclad or something. And it's not exactly like another Apple's coming along down the road.
Right.
So I guess the feeling is that, there's no other way to make money here.
ARM is a hugely important company to the global ecosystem, but surprisingly doesn't get that much money out of what it does for the world.
Yeah, they earned the rev when they came out in 2023 was 2.9 billion.
It's not a lot.
Yeah, that's like how much TSMC makes in a week.
Day. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, some of the early deals, like with Apple, it was actually a JV of Apple, Acorn, and VLSI in like early 1990, right? So it was born out of Apple. Steve Jobs era 2 Apple. And then it morphed into being something for everybody else with the cores and the instruction set architecture and being an alternative to x86, which is dominated by Intel. But then it just became more and more part of the global ecosystem. And I think the real takeoff for ARM was smartphones, right? Because that's when you needed something that was lighter, more flexible or whatever, compared to x86. And x86, famously has not really been in smartphones. And so Qualcomm, I think, is really that archetypal company that took ARM and took it to the stratosphere in terms of its exposure to the world, but not its revenue.
Right.
And that's the weird irony you talk about, is they've got these long-term contracts, they're everywhere, but they're not really getting any more money for it.
Right.
And so they go into the CPU business. But the flip side is, I remember every year at Computex, the ARM CEO would be in town, Warren East and then Simon Segars. And there was always this tradition that they would come into the Bloomberg bureau in Taipei, where I was working at the time, and they would sit down in the little TV studio they have there, and they would do a live interview for 3 to 5 minutes, usually on the first day of Computex. And invariably someone would ask about, M&A acquisitions, because that's, what Bloomberg cares about is deals and acquisitions and revenue and all that kind of stuff. And the answer was always something along the lines of, well, we don't worry about getting bought out. For some time there was talk that maybe Intel would buy them out. And the CEO would invariably say, no, that it really doesn't make sense. I can't comment on whether or not they will or they won't. We're a publicly listed company. But it would make sense because we cater to everybody, so it's kind of a natural poison pill. If you bought us, you'd be kind of losing 90% of our value because now you're a competitor to everybody. And so that's our natural protection. But now Rene has gone out and essentially eaten his own poison pill by creating a CPU that competes with everybody out there. And that's a bit weird. But they were almost at that point when they got delisted in 2016 when SoftBank bought them out, right?
Yeah.
And SoftBank was, all in. They had their big acquisition vehicles, and they were basically becoming the world's biggest VC fund.
Oh,
right?
I remember that.
Right?
That's weird.
SoftBank Vision Fund 1 and 2 and other stuff. And then they bought ARM, and some of the shares of ARM got folded into the Vision Fund. And then what happened 4 years later?
They tried to sell it to NVIDIA.
NVIDIA came along. And now what's interesting about this whole kind of snake eating its tail thing is that one of the biggest investors for a while in NVIDIA was SoftBank. SoftBank made a lot of money by buying into NVIDIA. NVIDIA stock went up and they sold. And now NVIDIA comes back and tries to buy ARM from SoftBank, but it failed because of antitrust reasons. You have to get regulatory sign-off from basically every nation in the world, but some of them are like, no, we're not cool with this, and it failed. So because it was an antitrust issue. Whereas 5 years prior, they went private and bought by SoftBank. Not an issue.
It was weird, right? And I've always wondered why, the UK government, and I really have looked into it briefly, and it really seemed like it was just they didn't recognize the importance of ARM at that time, or the semiconductor world wasn't important. It was pre-chip shortage, pre-Chris Miller chip war thing. And I think at that time, people didn't really think about it.
I think probably what happened was the UK government didn't have the institutions, bureaucracy in place to recognize that chips are a kind of a national security asset because chips are not a big thing in the UK. And then CSR, like Cambridge Silicon Radio, were about it at the time. And so, which part of the bureaucracy in the UK government would say, oh, hang on a second, we can't have a Japanese company buy this. And then someone would have to complain, and who's going to complain? And so it just went through.
Right. And it was they were worried about the jobs more like it.
Yeah.
Were there jobs leaving the country?
That's all it was. Yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, oh, it's going to be owned by a foreign power. Now, a friendly foreign power, right? Japan is a friend of the UK, but still a foreign power. so it just sailed through. Nobody thought twice about it.
Yep.
And then 4 years later, the Americans and everybody else is like, well, no, we don't want NVIDIA to buy these guys. But it was also weird, the idea that NVIDIA would buy them, because, again, the poison pill argument. Like, hang on, if you're owned by NVIDIA, well, practically speaking, what's the difference between owned by NVIDIA and owned by Intel? You can split hairs and say, well, one's a CPU company, x86 and NVIDIA. But really, at the end of the day, they're chip companies that were going to own a core IP provider.
Mm-hmm.
But the ARM sale to NVIDIA fell through, and SoftBank was stuck with it until they could IPO it, 2 or 3 years later, which they have subsequently done. And then the big debate pre-IPO was, would they list in London again, right? Because pride, national pride, they have to list in London first because, it's a British company. But of course, New York or NASDAQ made more sense. And that was really the big issue at that time.
Do you feel like NVIDIA could have gotten the transaction through if they did it prior to the chip shortage?
I think
because they did in September 2020. I just looked it up.
Yep. I think if NVIDIA had tried to buy out, delist them, which is essentially what SoftBank did, was delisting them in 2016. Let's say they tried in 2015. I think they probably could have got away with it. They might have got away with it. I don't know whether regulators in the US or China, for example, or Japan or
They
Korea.
didn't have control of their subsidiary in China,
Right.
Famously.
Very true. They might have got away with it. But the other thing is, NVIDIA wasn't kind of so big at that time either. So it's not like NVIDIA would have had necessarily the financial resources, they don't think ARM was that expensive. Or that kind of momentum that they've got now where, Gensanity is going around the world, NVIDIA is like king of the hill. They can kind of do whatever they like. It was a different time period. So the time at which NVIDIA probably could have got away with
but 2020 was still pre-ChatGPT.
True, but they were still on a roll. I mean,
the Bitcoin stuff.
True. That's what we forget. NVIDIA made so much money from Bitcoin mining, right?
Ethercoin mining, Ethercoin mining.
And so...
Ethereum.
Blockchain business is great for NVIDIA, and it set them up for AI, right?
I remember hilarious thing is like, this is how good their timing is. Like, they had the Ethercoin thing, like Ethereum, and then Ethereum pushed through a change in the code, which disabled consumer gaming GPUs from being used on it. They now have that proof of whatever, not proof of work,
stake.
Proof of stake.
Yeah.
And that basically caused like their GPU business to like lose like 20-30% or something like that. It was a weird time. And then like 3 months later, ChatGPT came out.
Right.
That's just like impeccable timing. I love it.
Let's be clear though, ChatGPT, when it came out, had been trained. It had taken months or years to train, so they needed GPUs to train it, right? Now, obviously that sparked a oh my gosh moment for the industry.
Right.
But, NVIDIA had been in the AI business before ChatGPT. It was just like when the average Joe like you or me noticed that this is a real consumer application.
Right, but the H200 and A200, they sold that. I looked this up. Like they brought a new one out every like 3 years or something. It was like a niche product. I remember looking it up too early because, like 2020, I was making videos about it, and it was kind of this niche product that they kind of threw in the back, and like the new one came out like every 2 or 3 years. Now there's one every year, right? Like they definitely tightened that up.
So
it's
now
very strange.
Now that ARM is still the thing to remember. We talk about all this, who could have bought them. They're now independent, right? They're still independent. Now, theoretically, hey, NVIDIA could make a bid for them. I don't think it would work because it already failed once. Maybe Intel would go for it. I wouldn't be surprised if Elon Musk says, I want to buy ARM. I mean, I don't see any reason why he would, but hey, I don't think any value to him to doing it. That's the other thing is, I don't know that there's any value to anybody but buying ARM because you get access to their licensing. It's super cheap, right? I mean, Apple doesn't pay a lot to ARM. Nobody really pays a lot to ARM. You can see it in their financials. But I think the risk now is, I think it would make sense for Apple to dump ARM altogether.
Interesting.
Over the next 10 years.
Really?
They already do a lot of non-ARM stuff. They have their own ISAs, right, for various things that they do. But Apple is going all in on their own silicon at all levels. They've even got their own silicon in their own data centers, right?
Right.
It's run by Apple Silicon now. And if they can then basically build out their own, what I would call their core ISA, because they do have other ISAs which they've developed themselves for various things. But, the iOS, macOS core instruction set architecture, if they went their own way, they could then have a lot more control over end-to-end, cradle to the grave, server through to the edge, on compute, on AI, on inference, on all of those things. How all of the sensors and everything else works within their ecosystem, because they absolutely control it and do whatever they want to do in their own proprietary way. ARM is great, but well, could we tweak this? Could we do this better? Could we design a chip different where this subpart of the instruction set really should be done in a better way, a more Apple way? So why don't we just do our own ISA?
Well,
And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 to 10 years they go, well, we're just going to go 100% Apple ISA. We don't need ARM.
Well, it's kind of like, it's interesting because what is an ISA, right? Like an ISA, if you think about it, it's like an alphabet soup.
Yeah.
It's like alphabet soup pastas, and you're putting together to make words. And then I think the thing is like, does Apple not, what does leaving ARM give them that Apple doesn't already have? They already have basically the alphabet soup, no?
They do in some areas, but if they wanted to basically, at the core level, at the the core chip inside an iPhone, for example, if they said we actually want to go our own way, the way, for example, information is brought from the SSD into DRAM, or the cache, L1, L2 cache, into the instruction itself,
Right.
and then the way the instruction is set up in 64-bit architecture,
Right.
like the way ARM does it is this, the add is this combination of ones and zeros.
Right.
But we want to do it our own way, or we want a function in there that we want to do our own way, not the ARM way.
Right.
They could just basically start from scratch and say, this makes more sense, our way of doing it. That means they could architect their L1, L2 cache differently perhaps, or all the other things, just like, why don't we start again? Why do we have to follow something that came before us?
Well, you could argue maybe it's like a different level of the TSMC thing, right? Like, why doesn't Apple build their own fabs? Maybe ARM is feeding knowledge that they're getting from Qualcomm
Yeah.
and all these other different
Yeah.
companies back to Apple, and that this is the benefit that Apple gets. They're saying, look, these are the best practices of how to use ARM. How other people are using this. They're kind of like saying, like, we should try this or try that. Not like trade secrets, but more like, this is what we're seeing more.
Agree.
And then, so that could be one benefit that Apple gets from staying with ARM. And also tie into why NVIDIA or some other company might want to buy them, because it's just a huge amount of chip talent, right?
Yeah.
And a time when NVIDIA paid $20 billion for Grok, right? Like, they essentially bought it for the talent.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, unless we
Or the
think
IP.
BIW is like the future. But like, it is fascinating.
Yeah, I think Apple. To be clear, I don't think that Apple would, if they were to dump ARM, would be for any financial reason, because they'd barely pay anything. And if they then had to develop, build a team of, core ISA architects or whatever in their own team, it might not be any cheaper. It's more for the pure flexibility of doing it absolutely your own way,
Right.
down to literally the ones and zeros at the very core kind of bare metal layer.
Word.
That's where I think Apple, it would make sense for Apple to say, we don't need ARM at all anymore, thank you, bye-bye.
Right. No, it's interesting. Well, do we have anything more you want to talk about your arms? You've been listening to Supply Chain. I'm John from Asianometry.
I'm Tim Culpin from Culpium.